I'm Enos Tromberg. I can't win. I'm Enos Tromberg. I'm a sophomore and a major in history and political science.
I'm Maggie Leppert, she, her, hers, and I'm a self-design major in disability studies and sociology.
I'm Emily Manshawi. I'm a junior elementary ed and history major.
I'm Queen. I'm an African American Studies major.
My name is Marcus Allen. I'm a journalism African American Studies double major with a minor in women's gender and sexuality studies.
My name is Anaya Smith. I am a self-designed literary visual performing arts major with a minor African American Studies.
My name is Audra Mobley. I'm a women gender studies major with a double major in African American Studies and a minor in philosophy.
I am Tyler Hubbard. I'm a senior English major with another major in self-design publishing and then a minor in women's gender and sexuality studies.
Hi, I'm Rachel Smith. I'm a communication studies and women gender and sexuality studies double major.
Hi, I'm Jada Gerson. I'm a double major in political science and English with a minor in African American Studies.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Luna. I'm a senior and I'm a major in sociology and a double minor in African American Studies and women, gender, and sexuality studies.
Hello, my name is Kim. I'm a junior communication studies major with a double minor in marketing and graphic design.
Hi everyone, my name is McKenna Sampson. I am an English and African American Studies double major, soon to minor in communications.
Hi, my name is Georgie Abdul-Mati and I'm a junior women gender and sexuality studies major.
All right, welcome to the Fish Bowl. And welcome to our Fish Bowl as well. So I'll say a little bit about the two chapters that we read in Dr. Collins' book because the arguments are multi-layered and complex, and which is wonderful. But I do want to stop talking soon. I promise I will. So Dr. Collins, we read two chapters of your book, on intellectual activism. One called Toward a New Vision, authored in 1989, has been widely cited and published. This chapter stresses many things, including the importance of empathy to building coalitions for change. Privileged groups must be able to empathize with subordinate groups in order to grapple with the ways in which they are privileged. Subordinate groups must be able to empathize in order to overcome their mistrust or distrust of people with privilege. Distrust that is a barrier to coalition building. In the second chapter we read, Where Do We Go From Here?, you reconsider the arguments and questions raised in this earlier work. You reiterate the importance of intersectionality to not only understanding oppression, but imagining and reimagining freedom and how we get there. You name multiple intersections: race, class, gender, sexuality, disability, age, citizenship, status, religion. You challenge us to consider multiple vectors of difference. You emphasize that we must not stop at theorizing and analyzing oppression. We must act on our ideas. We must produce ideas that can be acted upon. Intersectional analysis must be linked to strategies for achieving social justice. You assert that a language of community is essential to building coalitions across barriers of difference in order to create social change. The language of breaking barriers, you say, is necessary for building alliances among dominant and subordinate groups and within marginalized and oppressed communities, alliances that can effectively challenge systems of power that maintain social inequalities. So I turn now to questions for the group. First question. What does Patricia Hill Collins' work, before I, so we could share the mics to that side if you're less than lucky Mike. This side will get this culture now. So what does Patricia Hill Collins' work mean to you? How does her work impact you on a personal level, not a theoretical one, or a purely intellectual one, on a personal level? Jada, where are you?
So,
Sorry, I should not put that in the mic.
so for me, so much of how I think is conceptualized in theory, so it's hard to explain without borrowing from it a little bit. But for me, your work has affected me so deeply because it's about taking ownership of the way I move through the world and how we in general affect people. It's really like so much of your work is just centered in empathy and what it means to care about people and do it in an unabashed way where it's not embarrassing and you aren't ashamed of it and you put it in spaces where empathy typically isn't supposed to belong, like academia or politics or these things that are supposed to be without emotion. So for what your work means to me, it's about having the courage to care about people in spaces where that isn't necessarily always rewarded.
I messed it up, I'm sorry.
It's all good, go ahead, McKenna's next.
So, what your work really values is that there's this idea that there's, especially in this time, it's always been polarized, and it's more so than ever, where there's the right people and the wrong people. There's the people who are on the right side of history and the wrong side of history. And I feel like, for me personally, when I was growing up, there was multiple times where I'd be like, I contradict a lot of things. I am white, but I'm not white. I have a scarf on my head, so I'm a religious minority, but I also can take this off. So there's a lot of dualities to it. And I think intersectionality and that whole approach to that thought kind of helps garner that empathy with people looking at all facets of their life, rather than just looking at the parts that we find most relevant or the parts that oppress them or suppress them the most. It kind of looks at everything and it takes into consideration kind of not equalize the playing field, but better understand each other as people.
For me, your work honestly really encourages introspectivity within myself. As someone that comes from a middle class background, predominantly white, I am used to seeing myself as, the most oppressed person. However, there are people out there that are more oppressed that also experience other things that I may not go through. And so coming to the College of New Jersey and being able to meet so many different people, I've been able to really look within myself and find the ways in which I may perpetuate oppression upon these people, even if I don't need to. But also educate myself on issues that I may not fully know much about, but I would like to better educate myself and help those people that do experience that.
I would say that tied very closely to when I started my women gender studies degree was like the first Patricia Collins reading that I experienced. And like that tie to intersectionality gave me a lot more depth within my feminism. And once you have that framework of how you see the world and the ways in which like you are more similar than different to people and reaching across those boundaries with empathy, I think I take a lot in my daily life. And when I try and educate other people about feminist work, it's based on that empathy and to borrow from data, like that caring other people. So I think that's also what it means to me and how it ties into like how it affects. I think that a lot of your writing is so accessible, but it's also it has so much depth to it. And you do an excellent job of tying why all these oppressions and why all these coalitions do make sense together and why we're like stronger together than if we try and create a hierarchy of oppression. So I thank you for that.
Would anybody else like to talk about how Collins' work impacted them?
So prior to reading Patricia Collins' work, I was exposed to mainstream feminism that I feel did not represent me. And it wasn't until I became a WGS minor that I was exposed to Dr. Collins' work. Reading Black Feminist Thought for the first time opened my eyes to Black feminism. Black Feminist Thought was the book that I read that for the first time consisted of ideas that were produced by Black women and shares experiences of Black women that I obviously can relate to. I received a very whitewashed education in high school, and I often felt that discussions of feminism excluded me and disregarded my experiences as a Black woman, because most of the time the sexism that I experience is tied together with my race. So it is intersectional, and the sexism that I experience is intersectional. For instance, people's negative assumptions such stereotypes of Black women often affect their perceptions of my intellect and my abilities. So it's not just the fact that I'm a woman, it's the fact that I'm a Black woman. And when I read her work, it allowed me to feel included in a form of feminism where Black women have the autonomy to self-define and have authorship of their own experiences. and I hadn't been included in feminism like that before because a lot of mainstream feminism excludes the ways that feminism can be intersectional, and it's not just for white women, but for women all around the world. So thank you.
Oh, well, okay. So you, in your answers, the thematic connections include empathy and introspection, intersectionality, and mobilizing those forces to create social change in a very broad sense. So with that, I'd like to turn to the next question, which is, in Toward a New Vision, Dr. Collins challenges us to consider, quote, that piece of the oppressor which is planted deep within us, end quote. That comes from Audre Lorde. How do your privileged identities shape the intersectional concerns that inform your activism, community service, paid work, and your everyday life? So, how do your privileged identities shape the intersectional concerns that inform your activism, community service, paid work, or everyday life? And please name your identities in the process of answering this question. Who would like to go first?
Hi, I guess my identities. I'm a white, disabled, queer, middle-class woman. And for me, my privileged identities were something that I always kind of, when I was younger, I was like, well, they don't really matter because I have these marginalized identities. And as I kind of grew, I realized that my marginalized identities didn't excuse me from my privilege. And something that I see a lot in the disability community is this idea of white disabled people saying, but what about us, but what about us? And using that to kind of silence people of color in the community. And you see whenever people of color make progress, there are white disabled people who are saying, but what about us? And that's really frustrated me because it's looking at it as an either or, rather as a both and, which is something that you talk about a lot in here. And kind of taking these communities and putting them against each other. And the people who it ends up really hurting are the people who sit at those intersections of those identities. So for me, what this work really has taught me is about creating those spaces and recognizing when I do have those areas where I can't fully understand those experiences, and being able to recognize when people are talking over each other.
Thank you, Maggie. And one of the things that you had brought up in our previous conversations were you noted the disabled people of color, the people of color with disabilities. Well, you were talking about racism specifically and ableism, and that disabled people of color experience both. So I thought that was really important.
Hello, I am a Black, bisexual woman from a low-income community and which family suffers with mental illness. I think I had all the ones that deal with me. But when I read this question, I never looked at my privileged sides. I always looked at my oppressive sides because, like I said, I'm a Black woman from an urban community and I'm bisexual. So I feel like all of them are oppressive. I didn't think I had any privilege at all. So when I walk around campus, or if I always thought that no one has it worse than me. So like even in my everyday life, my activism, I'm just like, you can't complain because you don't have it worse than me. Like I'm the bottom of the bottom, the most marginalized. And that's always how I thought for a long time. And even when I read on page 223 in chapter 19, where he said that you went to a picnic and you saw a white family, and then he was like, well, at least they're not Black. And that's how I thought for a long time. If someone else was struggling, I'm just like, well, at least you have money, or at least like your hair is straight, or things like that. So I never looked at it from, oh, some things I have are privileged. Like I'm at college right now, and people from my hometown are not in college. That's a privilege that I have that I often don't look at as much. And I demean other people's oppressions because I weigh it towards mine, which I shouldn't do. And now that I read your work, that's something I'm constantly working on in my everyday life and my in my sorority and at work, like everywhere I try to include and just not weigh against other people's oppressions.
So one thing that really struck me reading your work was when you talked about who you surround yourself with as a privilege or as an expression of privilege. And I think that for me, I have been very privileged to been raised by academics. I've always had good education. I'm in college. And I think that I like to surround myself with people who have similar educational experiences to me, and people who enjoy having theoretical discussions about oppression. And I think that for me, when I am around people who don't have like the same, educational experiences that I do, I see that piece of the oppressor come out within me because I try not to look down at them, but I don't listen as carefully to their opinion and their experience. And I think that that's something that I'm really working on, is to be a better listener. And I think one thing with communities, like I'm a white, bisexual woman from a middle class family, but with communities, one thing we talk about is mistrust, that sometimes subordinate groups have of dominant groups, and I really sense that a lot. And I don't think that I always respond to it in the best way, because I understand why that mistrust is there, and I never want to tell someone that they shouldn't mistrust me based on their experiences, but at the same time, we talk about how to build coalitions, there needs to be mutual trust. So I think when that piece of the oppressor within me is something I'm always looking at, and one of the ways it's expressing itself now is how can I listen and establish trust to people who have different experiences from mine, even if they're not able to articulate it with the same theories that I am, or things like that.
Hi, I'm very nervous. So I'm gonna just name my privileged identities because I think what this question is getting at is to challenge yourself to look beyond your own oppressed identities and look at some of the identities you occupy that are privileged. So I am a lighter skinned Black woman, so that is a privilege. I am educated, so that entails, classism and elitism. I am cishet passing, that also contributes into how I express my gender. I'm physically able-bodied, and I think that this question is really getting at for you to challenge yourself to expand your ideas of what oppression looks like. One of the things that I brought up when we were discussing this is that this in itself, being in this space, is a marker of privilege because of how the vetting process went about of selecting who is in here. Because this isn't an event that's per se open to the whole campus, or an event that's per se open for people who have unconventional educational experiences due to their confounding oppressed identities have the access to participate in.
Well, that was a critique of the format of because she's doing what you've asked her to do and directed it at me. Thank you. And I heard you. Who is next?
So basically, with the pressure playing deep within us, I feel like we want to center ourselves in certain situations, but it really causes us to do a self-analysis of ourselves. So when we're saying about really looking at your privileged identity, so I can sit up here and say I'm a Black, bisexual, lower class male with disability, but if I look at my privileges separately, I'm a cisgender, male, able-bodied, but I'm also part of a fraternity. So then what Queen was saying, that gives you that elitist status in classes. So I know in some situations, let's say I'm arguing with somebody, I'm so quick to pull up, I'm educated, I'm getting a bachelor's degree in studies. But then at the same time, it's easy to look at the intersectional. So I can say that I'm a Black male, so obviously in white spaces that's not adequate in some situations. But at the same time, if I separate my identities, separately these are dominant groups, like a cisgender is a dominant group of men, being male is a dominant group. So it's kind of you just really have to check your privilege in certain spaces and like how to navigate those spaces. So like when I'm looking at myself and I'm like looking at the room, I'm like how I'm like the only male, like cisgender male like in the center circle. So it's like gives me this opportunity to talk about what needs to be talked about, but then like it gives me a space to listen to everybody else as well because I'm like the minority in the group, but then like the fact that I'm still a male gives me that power to like speak about things that like most people wouldn't speak about. So like it's really this self-analysis about like who you are and like how you actually navigate those spaces and use those privileges to navigate the spaces of the community.
Thank you, Marcus. Dr. Collins, do you want to comment or just pause in, check in with you? You do not have to.
It's hard for me to be quiet, obviously. But two things stand out for me in this conversation. First, no one mentioned the privilege of American citizenship. And I think that's one that is very invisible. It's an invisible privilege if you have it. And that you notice whenever you're confronted with someone who does not have that, which can happen, happenstance, or we see a lot on the news these days. And it seems like it's not, this country is so big and has a very stable democracy, even though it may not feel like it, that we don't necessarily appreciate all that went into creating what's here. So when I point to the notion of citizenship, that's the category of nation, and how those borders privilege some and disadvantage others. But it's one of those that's hidden in plain sight, unless it affects you on a daily basis. And the second thing that stands out for me in the conversation is how the shift, you talked all as individuals, which is an important starting place for thinking about intersections of these categories. But the danger that intersectionality now confronts is that people think that this is all that it is. It's a discussion just about individual identity. And the criticisms that come to intersectionality is that it seems very inward-looking, self-serving. I'm not saying you did this at all, but I'm talking about the criticisms if the field itself stops just with talking about the starting place. So the question of how you actually take these sensibilities that you have and think about how they work with social structures. How do they affect the schools that you attend, or how do they affect the jobs that you hold? How does this permeate this society? Is the sort of the next step question that I think we have to be a bit more vigorous in pursuing the times that we're in.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Just to answer the previous question. So in terms of looking at my identity, I am a Black working class immigrant woman. I have a lot of marginalized identities, and I often find
That's where I went for her next.
I often find that when I talk to people who share similar identities as I do, we often discuss how no one is more oppressed than the Black woman. However, when Dr. Francis presented this question to me, my answer to this question was shaped by my identity as an immigrant. I am from Kenya and I have lived in this country for 9 years. When I look at my identity from this perspective, I do have a lot of privilege. And when I visit back home or when I speak to my cousins on the phone, they tell me that I'm barely impressed because I live in America, I have a wide array of opportunities, and I get to attend a prestigious institution. Additionally, I'm aware of the fact that I am able and I'm heterosexual. Back home, I come from a very large family, and there are certain distant cousins that I have who don't have the privilege of even getting a high school education, who don't have anything to aspire to other than marriage. So I've become very aware of how privileged I am to live in this country and to be able to get the education that I'm receiving right now. And also, oftentimes, like living here, I'm called poor all the time because I live under the poverty line. People are like, oh, you're poor, or just even when you're filling out a form, like, you check the mark that says that you live below the poverty line, and I don't consider myself poor because of the country that I'm from, I'm able to realize that I, for one, have never been to bed hungry. I've never lacked clothing, I've never lacked education, I've never lack shelter. So I'm very aware of my privilege and I look at this from a global perspective. In terms of my activism, I currently work for an NGO called the 28 Days Project, and we collect feminine products for various shelters and organizations. And most of the women that I assist share the same identities I do, yet I am in a privileged position to help them. They don't have that privileged position that I do. I'm truly not poor, and recognizing my privilege allows me to use it positively because I'm aware that if I perceive myself as purely oppressed, I'll not be able to use the privilege that I have to help others, because some of the organizations that I help include LGBT youth who were kicked out of their homes and have experienced homelessness and now live in shelters. I will never know what it's like to go through that. And I might share certain identities with these people, but I also have my educational privilege. And looking at the country that I am from, so many women do not get the opportunities that I do. So I have to be very aware that I am very privileged, and I want to use it to help others who are similar to me, but also different from me.
Same question?
Same.
Okay.
Yes.
So I am an Asian American woman and I am queer, middle class. So what you said and then what you said, it sparked conversation of American citizenship. So I was born in America, so I have that citizenship, but my parents are immigrants. And it really wasn't until you had mentioned what the privilege of citizenship was that I really started thinking about it. Because I have family members who are from Vietnam who are in the process of getting their citizenship now. And my mom works with immigration. She's the person who helps people with their citizenship, with their paperwork and everything like that. So the topic of immigration and what it means and the things that people go through to become an American citizenship or American citizen are very prevalent in my life. And so thinking about the privileges that I have, so the fact that I'm able-bodied, that I was born in America, the fact that when people look at me, they don't see me as queer, are things that I don't think about because I think for a lot of my life, like other people have said, I think about the ways that I am oppressed so that I can focus on ways to alleviate the oppression that I have and people who are similar to me have. And it wasn't until as I got older and I continued the readings and the learnings and then from reading your passages that I was thinking about how not to just look at my oppressions in the way to alleviate my oppression or alleviate the oppression in my communities, but how do I use the privileges I have for people who are not like me, which is, I think, something that I'm still working on, is working, and it's tied along, I guess, with coalition on how do I take the privileges that I have and work with others who aren't like me so that we can help better our community so that we can just have more empathy and have more, I guess, radical compassion for people, which is, I think, the only way that we have real sustainable change is if we stop thinking about our own oppressions and our community oppressions and think about the people who are outside of our community, which is easy to say and a lot harder to do.
Would anybody in the outer circle like to make a comment or ask a question?
Hi, my name is Joella Torres, and just going based off that question and naming my identities, I identify as a queer Latina who comes from a lower middle class urban community. And I am physically able, but I also have my bouts with mental illness, and I think that coming into this space and leaving a city that everyone kind of reflected similar identities, I came here very resentful of those who had privilege over me, and just the assumption that all of them just inherently held bias against me. And I think really in my time here at the college, I've learned that in the same way that I want other people to see past the differences in our identities, I need to really embody that and do the same way. I can't hold inherent bias against other people just in the same way that I wouldn't want them to do that for me. So being in this space and having the privilege to be here and be educated in this space really made me look at the biases that I hold against privileged people, so I can deconstruct that, so that way we can really focus on building bridges within the community, rather than just assuming that everyone is biased against me or holds prejudice toward me, so that way we can really focus on community building rather than viewing everything as us versus them. I've been very grateful for that opportunity to really address like my own bias and also recognize the position that I'm in and the privileges that I do have, that I am a lighter skinned Latina and that I don't face the same oppression as women whose complexions are darker than mine, that I did have the opportunity to come here, that I do have my American citizenship, that I am able-bodied, so that way I can really advocate for those and listen to people whose identities are different than mine, so that way I can be a better ally for them, so that way we can continue to build these relationships and these alliances with one another. So I'd also just like to thank you for your work and for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so, very much. Inner Circle, I would like to move on to the topic of coalition building. If you want to share, if you want to talk about linking or respond to the question that's asking you identity, intersectionality to activism or social service, you can do that. But is it okay with you? Okay. And I would really like to start with those of you, actually, okay. I'd like to start the coalition building question. I'd like to start with those of you who haven't spoken yet. But you had something, I would love for you to share, to talk about white feminists. And before we move on, talk about white feminists and the ways in which you've caught yourself thinking about other white women. Would you do that?
Sure. So I was actually thinking about this when other people were going. So I do have a lot of privileged identities. I'm a citizen, I'm straight, question mark. Like basically I only really view myself as being oppressed based off of my gender, which is where a lot of my feminism starts from. And since I've been given this privilege with my WGS degree and some great mentors and some great scholarship, I've really tried to push myself and see, I have a lot of guilt, I think, a lot of feminists who are white might hold, but I don't think it's productive to just sit with that. So I talked a little bit about how I've started not thinking that my voice is necessarily the most important in every room. And specifically when I'm around some of the great feminists that are like in this circle and like at this school, I think that I've learned so much from their different experiences. As far as when I'm in other spaces that are predominantly white populated or white woman populated, I think those are my opportunities to speak out and try and redirect the conversation, not necessarily for those oppressed populations, but bring those topics back in. So I think I kind of have that internalized, not misogyny, but like I have some type of way that I look at some white women when they talk about feminism, when it's very much one-dimensional to me. And I talked about how once you have that lens and you kind of see the true depth there is to intersectionality, and you start asking questions of like who is being left out, you can start getting resentful because you don't want to believe that that white girl over there that's like in the pussy hat being like, why are black women so upset? Like Trump sucks. And like we're just all in this together. Like yes, but we need to start acknowledging those ways in which, we hopped on this bandwagon, but there are other people that have been fighting this fight longer. So I try and, in my own circles, check those people, try and educate them on things. But when I'm in spaces populated by people of color, other intersectional identities, I don't necessarily speak as much as I listen, which is something that I'm trying to work on. Is that good?
Great.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So basically what you're saying here is two different uses of intersectionality. Well, you didn't say it that way, but I just want to see, does this make sense to you, right? So in one setting, both of them are disruptive to the power dimensions of the groups that we're in. Because, for me, intersectionality is about power. So I'm going to bring that back in. When you're in a situation that is where you might be the only white woman or one of two, you're in a minority, but you're bringing white privilege into that setting. You're saying the norm, the power norms normally would be that I get much more floor time than I'm entitled to because my whiteness and my privilege do that. It's very similar to how men are in meetings. Men get to talk all the time, and you have to fight to get a word in, the right kind of thing. Whether it's just one man or 20 men, that's how male power operates in these groups. So you're saying that intersectionality in those settings allows you to see the power dynamics of how your privilege, how you can either uphold that privilege or you can undermine it by listening and being quiet. Yeah? Well, it's hard for all of us, but the point is. But I really like this whole notion because I often end in meetings where I truly wish some people would just shut up and say less. All right? And they tend to be the people who feel comfortable blabbing on all the time about everything. And I often say to myself, what's the privilege that allows them to do that? So that's one source of bringing an intersectional frame and undermining when you're in a group where you belong, but intersectionality shows you that you have more privilege in this group that you belong. And the other one you're saying is going to a homogeneous group where you belong, but it's homogeneous in a different way, and disrupting those social norms by changing the power dynamics of how they normally operate. The woman in the, you can hardly say the white pussycat, the pink pussycat, but whatever it is. You know what I'm talking about. And saying to them, but the story is more complicated than what you're saying. So in that one, you don't buy into the universality. You disrupt it as well. So it's using intersectionality differently depending on the group that you're in, vis-a-vis your own privilege, your own power, and the nature of the group. I don't know how clear that was, but there's an argument in there, right? So you can help me find it. Yeah?
I thought that was very clear.
Was it clear?
Yes, it was great.
Okay, well, you're not, see, you all are predisposed to think everything I say is unbelievable. And you need to know this is not the case.
Well, if you're going to hem us in like that, if everything we say that's positive about you is just some sort of social, I don't know, you gotta let us say this stuff. We want to express ourselves. Georgie.
Walking that back.
Walk it back, just a little bit, don't go too far. Because Georgie, I think this is actually a really good time for you to ask a question about entitlement. You can still make the other comment that you wanted to make, but, yeah. When we're talking about power and how power works in institutional spaces, can you ask Dr. Collins your question?
Okay, so in your chapter titled Toward New Vision on page 227, you state that because there's no compelling reason to examine the source and meaning of one's own privilege, I know that those who do so have freely chosen this stance. They're making conscious efforts to root out the piece of the oppressor planted within them. And then you say, to me, they are entitled to the support of people of color in their efforts. So for me, as a white woman, I read this and I was kind of concerned because I feel like there are a lot of well-meaning white people who are interested in building coalitions, and I don't know if they should necessarily feel entitled to the support of people of color. So I wanted to know if you could clarify first what type of support you meant and why they are entitled to it.
I don't know if I would say that the same way now. When I wrote Toward a New Vision, that was, 1989, 1990? I mean, this is like decades ago at this point. So it's interesting to me what holds up over time and what doesn't and why. I think I would clarify what I meant by that. The situations I was in at that time were much more, I don't think they did this way. They had a lot of conflict because people really hadn't had much contact with one another. And what I was thinking about specifically was the well-meaning effort of white women who had black children to understand racism, right? Because they didn't have to understand racism. There were certainly white women who had black children, they were biracial or they were black and adopted, who, some who had these children thinking that race didn't matter at all, and that they in fact were the vanguard of racial desegregation and integration because they were the ones who went boldly where other people were afraid to go. And I felt that was a problem. These were people who were not examining their privilege. All right, so that's not what I'm talking about here. I was really trying to parse out the differences between those people and research that was coming out at the time about white women who had biracial and black children who became anti-racist activists. That they started off not seeing racism or white supremacy at all. They may have started in that space of, sort of believing in the vision of a world where race didn't matter and they were going to raise their children differently. But they quickly realized that if they had black children, they saw the differential treatment of their own children. And that was an impetus not to deny that it existed, but to try and do something different. And seeing people undergo those kinds of struggles, and my black friends and I, we go home and we talk about, oh, can you believe it? Can you believe it? How naive they are? But we would then go back and say, how can we support them? Because that is really working to bring about something different and new. So that was kind of the catalyst for that statement. Now, since that time, I've come across legions of white people who feel that I should help them with their racism. All right, and I've decided, please, I'm really a good white person. Please help me, I'm trying, And in fact, they tend to infantilize themselves by thinking they can't do anything that's about racism without the support of people of color. So I actually can't have a discussion about racism in my class unless I have a black student. So if there's no black student in there, then there's no racism. So therefore, it's just all white people, and there's no point in having that conversation. So I just really now see many more settings, all right? But I think the fundamental effort that if you're with somebody who's really trying hard to look at the structure of power that privileges them and use it differently, not just understand it so they can have greater understanding, but use it differently. I look at a lot of my male colleagues who are just fabulous feminists, and put them in that category. They understand male privilege. They understand they are privileged as men, and they use that privilege in ways that are different than what it means to have that male privilege. And that's kind of what I had in mind, all right? So I'm glad you brought that up because it helps me sort of, I like that. I'll stop here.
Appreciate that clarification. So I did promise you get to make your comment because I did hijack that moment, right? So you can make what you're going to say before and then speak. And then if someone else has a question for Dr. Collins, that would be wonderful.
Okay, so I don't know if it's as relevant in the direction where the conversation is going now, but I was just going to revisit that I really agree with Rachel. I was in high school, and I went to a pretty diverse high school, but I still really didn't have an understanding of race and how privileged I was, because it was never something that I had been introduced to. I mean, before I went to high, I went to a private school. Race, we were all pretty much the same race. We were all some sort of Middle Eastern, so I never really understood the concept of race. And so I really focused on feminism, and I thought that all feminism was the same. And I remember writing this really generic paper in high school that I got 100 on, and I was like, this is great, like, I am great. and then I got to TCNJ and I took WS 200's the intro class with Dr. Francis, and I started reading your words, and I realized that I know absolutely nothing about anything. And I was so stressed because I was like, I felt that I was really this great feminist, and I found that I had the widest washed feminism understanding. And since then, I've really tried to learn, as a white passing woman at the very least, where my lane is, and that I was so far out of my lane. And so I tried to kind of get back into it and realize that there are spaces where my voice is important, specifically in spaces, like white liberal spaces where white people think racism isn't happening here, and like, racism is clearly happening here, versus telling like women of color how their feminism should operate based on my experience of feminism. And that's a lot in part thanks to your work, so thank you.
Transformative.
who needs to go into that setting. All right, and that's recognizing what you can contribute and what you should not do. And this is really refreshing because I can't tell you how many people want to come and raise your consciousness when they think you're downtrodden. I mean, it's fascinating. The class people come in, you obviously don't have enough class consciousness, you working class people. You do not have, you're poor, and I'm going to come tell you that. What? Come on now, what makes you think we don't know what's going on? Kind of thing. So, what can that person do to take that whole argument about class consciousness or racial consciousness and go into a setting where that is very difficult to make that argument, right? The example I'd use is a friend of mine who wanted to come and talk to my black students in Roxbury. I taught in Boston for many years about racism. I said, Bob, you don't have to come and talk to my students about racism. His name was Bob. I figured this is pretty good. This is pretty generic, and you probably don't know which Bob this is, all right? So I said, Bob, my students, we're doing okay talking with them about racism. We kind of get it, and I know you. Where you need to go is to the high school where you teach, which was 99.9% white, was South Boston High at that point, before DSEG. And talk to your students about racism. So Bob went in there and he said, but I don't know if I can do it unless you come. So I went to the school with Bob, and I sat in the classroom with like 25, 30 white working class kids, high school. And I said, they were all so polite and nice. Yes, ma'am. Obviously, it's a different time than now. And I left, and he said, I just don't get it. They won't talk about race. I said, Bob, I was sitting there. They weren't going to say certain things with me sitting there. But I'm not there. Go back and ask them the same questions again. And that's what shocked him. He was really shocked about the depth of the ideas that the students had around racism. And I said, that is where you need to work. That is your terrain. If you really care about it, that's where you can go that I can't go. I say similar things to my friends who are men. I can't go into the men's locker room and talk to a group of boys. That changes the dynamics tremendously if I'm the one doing the talking. But if you as a man go talk to other men about their sexism, and you check them, or you at least create a space where a conversation can happen, that's where you need to work if you say you truly are supportive of women's issues. It's not just enough to come and hang out with us and say, see, you all love me, I guess I'm good, kind of thing. So that's what I'm just sort of building on what you said, because I think it's really important, all right? You talked about yourself learning this, but I think these are pretty important political strategies as well. I keep giving us back.
Thank you. Thank you. So I want to make sure. Have you spoken? Okay, so just Tyler. Right.
Two things, an observation and a question also. Before we were talking about like citizenship, specifically dual citizenship, we were talking about it in the sense of like opportunities in America. But while everyone was talking, there was like one thing that my dad always used to say to me, it was like, you should be happy that you know where you come from. And I never understood what that meant, but I think something we also need to consider when we're talking about dual citizenship is that history that certain people have. So when I talk to some of my black friends who don't specifically know where they come from, that knowledge of knowing that I'm Togolese, that is a privilege that I recently found out about. And once I came to that knowledge, it made me uncomfortable not only in white spaces, but also in black spaces as well. So I guess my question is, when we're talking about support for my black friends, how do I be an ally to that? Because my primary identity is immigrant, so like, I don't know if I'm asking this right, but like, how do I support my black friends? Not knowing where they come from, but also in your activism and your oppression.
See, here's the issue. The whole notion of, you've got this notion that you come from somewhere, and everybody has a point of origin. And if once you know that, you're somehow better grounded than people who don't know that. Well, there are a lot of people who don't have a point of origin. In fact, there's no point of origin if you're from a mixed background. There's no point of origin in this type of history that we've grown up with, which is very much about mixing and all, in many, many ways. African Americans are incredibly mestizo population, right? Mixed population. So, your question, It's really good if you know certain things about your history, but where do you start that? Did you start that 500 years ago in Togo? I know where I came from. I came from Philadelphia. All right? Now you may say, well, you don't know your heritage because, can I go further, how far back can I go? I consider myself to be a new world citizen, right? Because I think those of us who are in these in-between spaces, which you're in, and you're claiming it, I call it an outsider within space, have to learn how to pull from all the different places we are and say, this is the direction the world is going. You can't put it back in the bottle and then just sort of layer a history on it of pure folk and then non-pure folk. Because you'll find that it's far more mixed than you think, in lots of ways. This is another implication of intersectionality. And I think this is an implication that really scares people, right? Because you always go with what you know, you go with what's comfortable. And we have these narratives of comfort. What my parents did, my grandparents did, my great-grandparents did, what they did before them, they knew better, they were grounded. We don't necessarily look at what was wrong with those histories. So thinking about the whole immigrant history and sort of what it brings to you, it brings good things and not good things. And that's the nature of the conversation between you and your friends. Their New World experiences bring good things and not so good things. It certainly brings among, I think, African Americans in this country, a very incisive and focused and historically grounded understanding of power and of racism. Because that's an intergenerational experience. That's the heritage, right? And we all have different heritages. So I love this I just love the way you're framing all this in terms of not just being right, all right, but also open to how you can work with people who have very different histories, but it may not look like they're different histories. How do you get that different history into nuances within the category young black person in America? All right, there's a lot going on in there, and that's intersectional as well around that group. So you're bringing to me a lens that I think we don't hear often enough, right? In a way that I don't think we hear expressed often enough. So, I like it. I don't know if you like my answer, but I mean, it was an honest answer.
That was beautiful, thank you. So I want to pick up on the thematic of history and also turn to coalition building. Kim, in one of our conversations that we had prior to this event, and maybe it was Jada, what came up was the long history in this country of Afro-Asian communities, Asians, Asian Americans, and blacks and African Americans coming together in a struggle to challenge white supremacy, resist white supremacy, and end it, structural white supremacy in their lives, and that this history has been virtually erased in mainstream spaces, in your college classrooms, high school classrooms, elementary classrooms, and what's in its place is this reality that there's conflict between Asian American and black communities, but there isn't just conflict between Asian American and black communities. There is this long history of resistance. And the purpose that this erasure of this history served, it keeps us working against each other rather than coming together. So Dr. Collins urges us to adopt coalitional politics and a community ethos as a strategy for achieving social justice. When Collins encouraged us to build coalitions across barriers of difference, Obama was president. And many people claim that we were in a post-racial society. Many white people claim that we were in a post-racial society. That racism was a thing of the past. Years later, Trump's election and presidency has thrust multiple forms of bigotry into visibility in society's mainstream. Racism is visible in a way that it has not been since, in my opinion, since the end of Jim Crow, legalized race segregation in the US. Anti-Mexican immigrant views, misogyny, anti-trans beliefs, ableism, the degradation of poor blacks in the US, Haiti, and Africa, all forms of bigotry that Trump has explicitly verbalized. The Trump presidency has emboldened bigots. Hate speech is blatant, hate violence is on the increase. So here comes the question. I'm going to refer to intersectional white supremacy, and I want to be clear about what I mean when I say that. When I refer to intersectional white supremacy, I'm describing ideological and institutional white supremacist, sexist, classist, ableist, anti-immigrant, anti-gay, anti-trans oppression. To make that very concrete for you, Donald Trump doesn't just have a problem with Haitian people here and trans people here and disabled people here. He got a problem with disabled trans people from Haiti, right? He's got plenty of hate for people with multiple identities. And he is stirring up that hatred across the nation. So here's a question, and if you could really put a fine point and emphasize how you are challenging structures of power, how the coalition, your strategy for building coalition challenges structures of power in response. So it'll be Tyler first and then Queen. So, no, I didn't ask the question. Did I ask the question? Right. So Collins asked, how can we transcend, these are your words, how can we transcend the barriers created by our experiences within intersecting systems of oppression to build coalitions that foster social justice? In other words, in 2019, in a context of blatant intersectional white supremacy where you and the social group to which you belong are under attack in a variety of ways, how can you build coalitions across barriers of difference? Particularly with people who are attacking you, people who support or actively pursue the obliteration or suppression of your rights. Tyler.
Go,
Please don't clap till after I'm finished. So I'm just going to say one thing first, that these are some of the hardest questions I've ever tried to answer. And I thought I was getting good at this. I'm not. And that's also part of the reason why I like to work, because it's hard. And it's really, there's a lot to chew on. But going into that question and kind of going through, leadership stuff at TCJ, I think something that I have tried to learn and get in my head is that not everyone is really existing in the same reality, in terms of that everyone has different views of what we consider the same things. So everyone has different truths. Everyone has different people they consider authorities or valid or oppressed or oppressors. And those just aren't universal things the way that I think a lot of us would believe them to be. So one thing that I have tried to do is use language and how I communicate with people to kind of break down those barriers. So specifically in academic circles, and I'm an English major, so I love words, a lot of the way that I speak in a lot of circles is very academic. I use buzzwords, I'm using jargon, I'm using things that I've learned in class because I've learned how to name a lot of my impressions. Not everyone knows how to do that. Not everyone knows terms like intersectionality. Not everyone knows really what privilege even is. And so for me to assume that other people do is that's because my reality, those words make sense and those words are simple. So Michelle actually brought this up last night in our conversation, was that a lot of times there are words that we as feminists or activists use that mean things that other groups use that mean the same thing. So for example, if you're going against someone who's maybe a white supremacist, they might say things like freedom a lot, or like America, or like things like that. Feminists are also advocating for a more free America, but in a very, very different way. And we probably wouldn't even say that. But if I were to go to a person and say, I want America to be more free too, we agree on that. We just can't agree on the method. And so I think it's really important for us to kind of learn how to make our language more accessible, but not strip it of meaning completely, where you're not actually saying anything. So an example of this specifically is, we have a group on campus that advocates for a pro-life group. And Rachel actually, last semester took the time to actually speak to them. And a lot of what they are centered on is more care for mothers on campus, specifically. But we would have never understood that that's what they're going after unless we spoke to them and kind of dumbed down, per se. So there are actually a lot of things that we agree on. Yes, we agree that it should be easier to be a student mother. We just don't necessarily think that everyone should have to be a student mother. But it's that conversation, it's that breaking down of language that has really helped me personally go across barriers to create coalitions. And of course you can't create them with everyone, but at least getting that sense of what someone is really trying to do at the root has been very helpful and very useful.
So wait till the end. So
on every single reproductive right, but you can agree on some reproductive rights, and that's what you found in that many conversations.
They had a petition that they were asking people to sign to include more changing stations for mothers on campus. And so maybe we can agree on that initiative, but as soon as something has like a, you know, maybe that's not the thing that we choose to sign, but I think also with that, sorry, I just told Mike, are we choosing, you know, I'm gonna hate this group, so I'm not gonna help this initiative, when the people who can benefit from those initiatives are people that are worth helping.
Okay, so I think this answer is a little girthy, but I'll speak a little fast, so, okay. So when I think about this question, I think that it has to be taken through a class lens. The ways in which America has been structured as a capitalist economy and now influences the world through these ideologies. And even though I believe race informs everything, essentially capitalism is like the vehicle in which everyone's oppression is created. And the reasons why I still believe race informs everything and it's like seen through a class lens is look at how in Latin America, you know, lighter skin is equated to wealth. Or in America, your proximity to whiteness is like, you know, directly correlated with your ability to be upwardly mobile. Also, my thinking that it's a class question lies in my added belief that there is no possible way to build a coalition with rich white supremacists. The common sense ideologies of white supremacy does not operate on fact, it does not operate on empathy, and subsequently those ideologies of white supremacy, when it comes to contact with economic powers, it has been historically proven that they do not and have not found the desire to cultivate human empathy. The ability to build coalitions based in human empathy has never been a collective issue of persons who experience the extremities of intersecting white supremacy. Example of this includes civil rights movements that birthed into human rights movements, how trans women's rights are human rights, James Baldwin, and the list continues. And I think that this is particularly attributed to the fact that it's much easier to consider the humanity of others when you constantly have to defend your own. I think that the answer to this question and putting that answer into praxis requires a nuanced ability to see past the pieces of oppressor within self and other, and the ability to put true Black feminism into practice and understanding that a system of oppressed and privileged folks dehumanizes everyone in the end. It definitely dehumanizes the person who are victims and understanding that contextually, you know, being considered, words, yikes. The nuanced ability to see, they contextually consider oppressed or privileged alike, depending on the context. And you know, people who are considered privileged in a sense like that is also contextual. To dehumanize me and to think of me not a person, as a person, in itself makes you, you know, a participant in your own inhumanity. I think that in terms of working class persons, people outside of the 1 percentile of concentrated wealth in this country, that as a collective whole we have a numerical power that is vital to upkeeping a system of privilege for that 1 percentile. As the saying goes about controlling the poor white person's dollars, the inability to build coalitions that center humanity lies in so many social historical experiences that have made it impossible to see each other as we are and kept everyone at a continuous dichotomous compartmentalization. As Baldwin says, how can you know me if you don't come home with me? And like a personal example is that when I'm in a classroom with predominantly Blue Lives Matter folks who I know from my personal and historical history and experiences that police officers in particular have been mechanized to really inflict all kinds of violence on people who look like me. But I'm in a classroom full of people who do not see, you know, that disconnect. And it's really on some, because I have to continuously prove that I am a person, it becomes that much more easy. And that's really what it is in the end. And additionally, I think
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm wondering if, do you want to respond to Queen?
I want to respond to this point, but I don't know if I want to respond directly
reason is because when they come into our spaces, they, like privileged people in general, I know I'm also a white person, so I can also participate in that. Like when privileged people come into these spaces are dehumanizing the people in them. And that's something that I actually kind of have a question for you and for the group. I'll use an example to kind of illuminate it, because you were also talking about the pro-life group. I have an event that I run, and it's next week, and the pro-life group wanted to co-sponsor the event. And for context, last year they had an event where they basically said that rape victims who had abortions were murderers, and it was very triggering for a lot of people. And I had kind of this disagreement with other people I was working with, where I was saying putting their name on my event is making that event unsafe for survivors and is telling people that this is not a place where they can feel safe. And it's putting the emotional labor on them. But then other people were saying we need them at the table because we need to educate them. And that's a battle that I've had with a lot of people of where do we find that balance between feeling the need to educate people and feeling the need to cross those barriers, but also recognizing the hurt that it occurs when you try and bring these people, and how a lot of times when we're trying to build coalition, what ends up happening is we're prioritizing the feelings and the comfort of the oppressor over the feelings and comfort of the marginalized people. And I've really struggled to find that balance. I don't know if people have ideas or recommendations of how to do that.
Just to answer your question, this reminds me of we're in the same capstone. So recently we read a book called The Calling of the American Mind, and although I disagreed with it, there's some points that were brought up that I thought to myself are things that we have to talk about in our society, things that make us uncomfortable. So in the class I was saying that for me as a Black woman, I often undergo multiple microaggressions that I have to correct. In an ideal world, that I assume all of us sitting here want, I shouldn't have to correct people and I shouldn't have to teach people how not to be racist. But unfortunately, that's not how the world works. And when I was in class, I was talking about this book, which basically said that we have to learn to listen to the other side, and we also have to listen to their opinions, which might be traumatizing to us. But sometimes we are put in situations where we might have to correct these people because sometimes people make racist comments because they're downright racist, but sometimes these comments come from a place of just ignorance. They truly don't know. So I was given an example of how people might be like, you're so articulate. What does that mean? Am I not supposed to be articulate because I'm a Black woman? Or you're so educated. Am I not supposed to be educated? Or if I know something, you're shocked that I know it. You know, just even when I got accepted to the school, people were shocked. And I'm like, well, why are you shocked in my predominantly white high school? And she was telling me that I shouldn't have to do that. And I completely agree with that. I shouldn't have to. But the world isn't ideal, and sometimes you have to. Because these are the only ways you can build coalitions with people who will be able to cross over to your side. Because I think there's a huge difference between someone who's a downright white supremacist and someone who genuinely is ignorant. Because you do meet these well-meaning white people who might be able to come to your side and I think build coalitions with you and help fight against the system of white supremacy. Because at the end of the day, you need those people. In my opinion, a white conservative is more likely to listen to a white liberal. Let me rephrase that. A white supremacist is more likely to listen to a white liberal than me. So if I'm able to, unfortunately, educate this white liberal to come to my side, I have a stronger group on my side, and I have more of a chance of reaching white supremacists.
But you don't have time to do that. And that's really the issue here, all right? There are plenty of opportunities to have coalitions among people who are already ready to have coalitions. So to me, there's a certain price of entry into certain types of settings. It's not that one side educates the other and the other is dragged kicking and screaming or protesting its innocence into a coalition. That's going to slow you down. It's really not making assumptions about a group that everybody in that group thinks the same way and asking what are the possibilities for coalition. Now, I think it's really important now to decenter whiteness in talking about coalition building, right? I really do at this point, because it's clearly white supremacy is a big system, but we're really talking about power structures and white is a very obvious one, but not the only one, right? So where this whole discussion started, the politics of coalition building under post-racialism and the Obama administration, it was almost as if many, many groups in this country believed that they just had their own history, their own struggle, they could go their own way. Black people could do this, Latinos could do that, Asians could go this direction, indigenous folk, who we haven't mentioned, could do. So all of the various groups were kind of thinking things are better. So maybe we don't have to think about coalition politics. Maybe we can, maybe it's really behind us. I mean, I think there's a certain element of that, even though there was clearly a pecking order among all of these groups. One thing that the 2016 election did for us, and the changing climate that we're in was, it made it extremely clear that many, many groups were targets, differentially targeted, but targets nonetheless. Bringing into sharper view groups that never thought about the other groups at all, right? So some have been spending time thinking about oppression from day one. Others were shocked to discover they were racial groups in certain ways, or were discriminated against. And the virulence of kind of what we've had to see happen, sadly, over the last couple of years is an actual opportunity for a kind of coalition politics among groups who can now see their common interests. So at this point, to begin to think about what those common interests are, the common interest is not the relationship. We're talking about the mechanisms of the relationship. You know, how can we get along? Do I have to teach you? You're going to teach me? Which is important in day-to-day work. But my question would be, what are the common interests that lie at the center of any coalition? What's the common agenda, even though we differ about how we might approach it? Finding the common principles. Is this going to be all the people who are unemployed? Boy, that's an intersectional analysis right there in terms of how that affects different groups, depending on your age, depending on your race, depending on your citizenship status, depending on this, that, and the other. But we're not talking about that kind of common issue. The opioid crisis, all right, that's a common issue that affects people quite differently. You know, if not directly, indirectly. All those children, if you really want a right to life, you have to also think about the children whose lives have been affected by the health status of their mothers, many of whom are not with us anymore. So there's a list of concerns that I think a lot of people share. But we're so busy being distracted by, first of all, being defensive, having to protect oneself from these attacks and assaults, that we may be missing this opportunity to see this is the time for coalition politics. Because everybody has a little piece of the problem, which means everybody has a piece of the solution. And you all would be leaders in that, thinking up through the issues and also thinking about what makes sense. Now, I know everybody here seems to be really good-hearted and kind-hearted, and you just want to, you know, there's something that bothers you about having to teach a racist to not be racist anymore. Unless someone is paying you to do that, don't do it, all right? If that's your job, do that. But if it's not your job, you don't have to do that, all right? No, you know, and if it's a question of teach a racist to not get a racist to stop being racist because it's harming you, that is your job, all right? But beyond that, this is just way too much to carry. This is the weight of history that you did not create. So for me, the issue is this historic moment. This is the time when we can see a country that is truly multi-ethnic, multicultural. This is not a country that's black and white. This is a country, it's always been multi-ethnic, multicultural, multiracial, multi-sect. It's always been there. It's always been there. But now we can see it. And often many of the groups are organized. They know that they are groups. You know, for quite some time, the feminist movement, for example, most women did not know they were, well, they knew they were women, but they didn't think of themselves as part of a group. That's what feminist organizing actually did. To say, you know, you're part of a discriminated against group, but an empowered group as well. So we're in a very different place in terms of tools and skills that were not there when I wrote that first article. And now, with the slap upside your head, and I'm not used to saying that, to slap some sense into you, you know. kind of moment where I'm like, oh, there's no point in being stupid when we have a common enemy. So the whole question of just vesting white supremacy with all of this stuff in the middle, all of our talent, and struggling, how do we actually deal with the white supremacy? Take that same energy and say, how do we deal with something like people of color and all that operates under that particular head? How do we deal with the range of gender fluidity at this point and how that articulates with all of these other traditional categories? This is the time for new questions around coalitions, all right? Now, I don't know how, because I sense you are in a different place around how you're thinking about this than perhaps where I am now, because we're not in that post-racial era. This is how do we take these ideas and how do they work now? And there's simply not enough time and resources and educated people to go save people who don't want to be saved. They'll find you. There are lots of good white people. Ooh, I said it, yes. Why would you go tracing after the bad ones?
Thank you for that advice. There are lots of good white people.
There are.
I do not disagree with you. I'm saying it out loud so everybody can hear you. So Eno, and it would be Amali, and then I wanted to ask, go to the outer circle, see if anybody had a question for you all, and I'm going to give, you will be among the 2, 3, for example, 4, and 5, right, that I give the opportunity to answer first if you want to. So we are almost near 3:30. So gifted, talented, and beautifully brilliant people, if we could just keep it sound bite. Can we do that? Okay, go ahead.
I'm like a little bit rethinking my prepared answer in light of what you just said, but I think I see the value of turning internally and looking at where we have coalitions and examining the structures of powers we have within them. I really like what you said about like naturalized hierarchies and things like that. Why is there like systems where there's always a winner and a loser, as opposed to systems where all of that is fluid? So I think that I see the value in thinking about that, and I try to. But I do think that as a white person, I'm a white Latina, but I am white, I see it a little bit more as my responsibility to educate people, because I think that there's something that happens in white spaces when there's no people of color around, and you talked about this a bit, but where people start to say things and you hear them in your head and you roll your eyes and you're like, oh, am I going to do this? And I think that, yeah, I'm going to do this. And I think that that is one thing that I think people with privileged identities should speak up, especially when they stand to have consequences because of it. Because for me to talk to someone who is displaying white supremacy or religious intolerance and things like that in some way, I'm going to have more credibility as someone who's protected by those systems. They're going to listen to me more, and I'm going to be less in danger than someone whose humanity they're disagreeing with. So,
what would be the outcome that you would want after that speaking up? What do you want to be different in that person? Is the situation different? Is the person different? Or is that something for you?
I think that's a really good question. I think that is a really good question. Like, is it making myself feel better, or is it actually making a difference?
But be clear about what the difference is. Not just make it, it's different after you said something. But what do you want the outcome to be? This is what I mean about focus on an outcome. And then the strategy matches the goal. All right? It's a different way of thinking. It's sort of like, yeah, we can just keep talking forever and
So this might be an unpopular opinion, but I think one outcome I want to see is consequences for people's actions again. I think one thing we saw when we thought we were living in a post-racial society is it was a bad thing to say, like, if you said you were racist, there would be social consequences. Now we have people who are going out and shouting that in the street and they're proud of it, and there's no social consequences. They keep their jobs, they're allowed to do whatever they want, and we hear a lot about that on this campus, that like we're not inclusive enough of conservative opinions. It's because you're devaluing people's humanity, and demanding the right to an opinion and free speech doesn't mean there's no consequences for what you say, and you don't get to like get a free pass for devaluing people's humanity. So I think one thing I see is When I speak up, maybe they're not going to think any differently because I can't get in their head, but at least they're going to know that they can't say that around me, and that what they're saying is offensive to some people, and no, like, I'm not the coddled American mind of just having basic human rights. So I think for me, one aspect of advocacy is just saying, like, no, you can't say that. Just shut up, you can't say that.
Thank you.
There we go. I'm glad I intervened. Yeah. The difference is pushback. Using pushback will mean that there'll be less of it coming down the road after you push back. And that's probably accurate. But that's a clear outcome you're thinking about, not just sort of like, oh, this feels like the right thing to do, which is where you started. Now, I didn't think that's where you were going to end up, and you didn't. Okay, that's it. I'm not picking on anyone else. You just felt particularly hard.
I like that.
I'm taking it, guaranteed. I mean,
I'm gonna enjoy my not pick on Pat. No, it's okay. I don't mind. I live in suburbia, and I don't know if you know this. I'm North African. I don't say I'm African American because I don't know if you saw this. I'm white as hell. This is a defect. Nobody else in my family is this white. This just happened, and I benefited from it, and also don't benefit from it. But when I work at a gym, and I swear to God, yesterday a woman said to me, we were just talking about something about just something, and she was like, yeah, and she was like, and they don't ever talk about the black people who just get the job because they're black. And I was like, oh God, Jesus. Oh God. Because there's the validity. There's some arguments where I'm like, I get it. There's a validity to what you're saying. But there's also so much where I'm like, I can't, there's a point where you can blame it. There's some people who are just racist. There's a lot of people who are literally seeing a different news channel. They're seeing a completely different perspective. One girl came up to me and she was like, is there a reason why the gym always has Fox News on? I was like, one, we don't know how to change the channel. Two, that's the safer option in this area sometimes. Like, we live in a predominantly Democratic area, but it feels like the conservatives will see it and feel appeased, and the liberals will be able to have a conversation and they feel appeased because they can talk. Which I thought was my favorite part, was that you're talking about intellectuals. The people who are like, oh, let's have a discussion about race, and let's talk about kumbaya, everything's gonna be great now, and that's it, and there's no action. And I feel like I am white, and I'm a teacher, that's my goal. So when I teach, and even when I'm in classes for education, I've had discussions because we're working in an urban school, where I'm like, your language right now is not appropriate. You're talking about something, and you're not acknowledging. Yes, everybody has intersectional identities, and yes, we could talk about them all day, and talk about how everything affects everything. But when I see someone, or if I work with kids over the summer who are saying things about the election, I come to it through the intellectual piece and being like, what is your thought? Like, say it. Have your free speech at this moment. There was a kid who was talking about, like, Blue Lives Matter, but if you listen to what they say, and you don't alienate everything that they're saying and interrupt them with, oh, they're white and they're a white supremacist, and you really sit back and listen, there is some validity to what they say. It's the way that they take that message that changes. My dad is the priest equivalent at our mosque, and when Trump got elected, the night before we found out, he was like, I feel like he's gonna win, one, and he said, two, I feel like this is gonna be the hardest but the best thing for the American culture. Because he said, everybody is under this impression that we're not racist, that there is no problem, and we had Obama, and kumbaya, racism is over. And he was like, this forces that uncomfortable conversation. I've had so many uncomfortable conversations with my coworkers, but I've also seen from the one kid who in 2016 was talking about how Hillary Clinton should go to jail and die. It was a very weird day. I've seen a change in him where now I knew from the back of my mind he's going to be an officer in the Navy and then eventually a police officer. That's his goal, and he's already admitted. So when I was talking to him, my idea is why not alienate the kid, because the kid is listening to a completely different fact channel. You can't.
I'm so sorry. I hate to do it. I'm sorry.
You can do it.
I have to do it. Thank you so much. You said a lot there. So I want to give the outer circle a chance to respond. Do you have a comment? Do you have a question? And I am going to ask certain people first to address it. Certain, those of you who haven't spoken a second time yet. All right. Yes, Clay. Comment or a question?
Hey, Queen, can you send me the rest of your answer, because I was really looking forward to hearing
question you guys and figure out how do you determine when you're right in a situation where you all have said that you want to back check people because, you know, maybe it make you feel good, maybe it'll correct them in their assist and how they move forward with life, but how in that sense can you determine that you are correct and they are wrong?
Kim, Jada, yes, Tyler. Is Tyler the only one that wants to respond to that?
So I think you bring up a really good point of like, well, let me back up. I think one of the problems is that people think there are right answers to certain things. And I don't think there really is at this point. I mean, truly, we are living in different worlds right now, and there are some things that are a fact. 2 + 2 is 4. The sky is blue. The sun sets in the west. Yeah. But there are like, but the problem is that you also have to then interpret those facts and what that means. And that's where the trouble comes in. So for example, it is a fact that in this country, Black people are disproportionately poor. What is not a fact is the opinion of why that is. So the thing is that you can count facts and have all the statistics that you want, but numbers don't really mean anything in the greater conversation because then you have to interpret what that number actually means and then whose fault that number is or who caused that number. So I think one of the things that we have to not do is get caught up in who is right or who is wrong or who has incorrect facts or is what, because we don't know what facts are anymore in this country. Facts are no longer facts. They're not. So I think rather what we need to do is realize, okay, what information is out there and then what proof do we have to back that up? And also, where that information came from and what proof do we have and where that came from too? I mean, if the Mueller report is a prime example of how that works because some people say no collusion, some people's like, we can't say if there's no collusion or not. But it's written in black and white, so something in there must be truth. But it depends who's reading the document.
Thank you. Jada.
Yeah, I also think it depends on context and also just what environment the truth is being said and who's consuming it, like Tyler was saying. But I also think there's a such thing as truths that are harmful and truths that are not. So previously, like what you were saying is you're like to some extent, like some people's points have a shred. Every point has at least a shred of validity in it. Sometimes. Yeah, I'm gonna say sometimes, not most of the time. But there are truths that hurt people, and I don't think like a truth that used to be is the American Psych Society or whatever it's called used to say that like transgender identity is a sign of mental health. At some point, that was a truth in quotes for people who can't see me. But that truth hurt people, and it's still has ramifications of transphobia today and harm that people have to live with. So I think what the effect of what you're saying matters a lot when I'm determining whether or not I'm right in a conversation.
Thank you. Is there another question or comment?
So for the group, how do we use how do we use coalition building to include groups that have been erased? For example, the indigenous population. We don't, like in spaces, we don't include them. We don't include indigenous women and their experiences, and that's, you know, there's multiple reasons why, but my basic question is, how can we include coalition with populations who are marginalized and marginalize further? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I would say, in order to do that, and I think we kind of talked about this in some of our previous conversations, you have to kind of look outside your own experience, and you have to look to people that are experiencing other things, maybe to a different degree than your own. I would say, to give an example, we were going through everything that happened on campus last semester with the racial issues. We also reached out to the people that may not have felt the effects of the racial issues, but also felt unsafe because, again, they could possibly be targeted next, per se. And although maybe all the incidents that happened were not highlighted to the same degree, we all worked together to have a common understanding that we were going to work to implement policy and bring about change to ensure that it wouldn't happen again?
I would also say that it's important to, one, I think when coalition building, to reflect back and see like who's not being included and have that space for them, but then to also recognize that because of the history of exclusion of these people, that some of these people may not want to yet join your coalition or your group because of the hurt that they've experienced. I think it's really important that you have that space and you continuously keep that space open, and then like make sure that your space is comfortable, but to recognize when people are seeing themselves not there, they may not be comfortable stepping in, and that is perfectly fine for them as well because of the exclusion and of the pain that they've felt. That you can't make them come into your coalition and you shouldn't force them to be there, but you should always have that space available for them there. Because coalition building, I think, doesn't happen easily, but it can happen and you can't necessarily rush it.
Thank you, Kim. I think an important point here is why would someone join a coalition? The whole notion of who is the we and what is the agenda. And in the situation of indigenous folk who have a long history, storied history, lots of traditions, it's not a question of just because that those groups and their multiple groups are invisible in the academy, that they don't exist. All right, the issue is we don't know what people think, and there may be a really good reason why we don't know in terms of what's happened in the past. So it goes back to my notion of this, a coalition is not an inherently good thing. It's a strategy to achieve something. That's why people join coalitions. Let's join forces together because they're trying to put a dumping site next to our neighborhood in New Orleans. And your neighborhood in New Orleans is also next to that dumping site, and our neighborhoods are completely different, perhaps Black and Vietnamese, but we might want to get together, to figure out a coalition because we have a shared interest here. All right, so that's what I meant about strategically, what's the agenda, what are the issues, what's at the center that people can organize around, as opposed to a coalition as fleeing pressure from someone else. It's like what pulls people together as opposed to pushes us together. So if what pushes people together is the pain and suffering of racism and sexism and all that, well, yeah, that's important. But when there's no longer the belief is that enough? All right, is that enough to sustain long-standing coalitions that are needed for the types of issues that are out there? There's plenty of work to be done. You can pick what you want to specialize in, whether it's around educational issues or even the gym, body culture. I don't even know. There's so many things, the issues that may concern you personally. Mental health issues, it's a big issue in this country in terms of services, all right? A lot of things, but something's got to draw people together where you have a sense that it's worth your while to go through all this pain and suffering of working across these kinds of categories in a group. And I think, when you're in college, it's okay to just not have to think that way right away. But down the road, for the long haul, that is really what those coalitions are all about. And as I said earlier, we're in a moment where there's a possibility for groups that historically have never had coalitions, or groups that happened in the past, but they've weakened. It's a time to do something really different. So I agree with your dad. I'm glad to hear your dad said, this is an opportunity, right? Even though it's a painful one. So anyhow, the indigenous question really raised that for me. It's not a question of let's let these poor people in, let's help them. They're fine.
Yeah. All right, no, we have a question.
I'm going to frame my comment in the context of political parties. Over the summer, I heard a very inspiring quote from a protest that I was at, and a woman, in talking about decentering whiteness and including marginalized communities, how many progressives and people who fight for progressive communities often want to flip red voters to blue. And she had said that our cause should not be about flipping red to blue, it should be about flipping non-voter to voter. Because many marginalized communities have been excluded from voting rights. They are affected by restrictive voting laws, gerrymandering, not being considered citizens, voter purge encouraging voter identity laws and in restructuring our coalitions to include things that dismantle these laws, I think is a very good way to include marginalized communities and decenter whiteness from coalitions.
You don't have to respond to this one. Do you either of you want to respond to this one? Do you want to ask a question, Annie? You don't have to.
No, it kind of got answered, so.
Okay. Marcus, do you want to ask a question? Or do you want to make a comment?
I had a comment on the coalition. Basically, like kind of like everybody was saying, like we cannot like everything that happened last semester. It was part of a question that we talked about in our discussions, like how do you do coalition inside your group? And with what we were doing last semester, kind of like shaped that, and that gave me like, you know, everybody has their own niche in society, and like how they, you know, it goes back to like the methods of that goal and what that agenda is. So like, you know, you may have some people who just like, you know, I'm just gonna burst down the door and get what I need done, and you're gonna have some people who are actually gonna be like, you know, sit at the table and actually have those conversations. So like, finding that niche in society, like that makes you feel comfortable, that for that end goal, you know, I can say that, you know, in some situations I'm more radical, I guess, in the ways I handle things, but at the same time, relying on those other groups that have those similar, those agendas and those goals as yourself, but like letting them, you know, decentering yourself from the table for a moment, but to bring it back around full circle, it's like, you know, this is what we all want, and then every, obviously every group has their own issue, but then like just being supportive of that, you know, being like caring for those issues, even though they may not have affected you, but you know, like, we're here, this is a common enemy, this, you know, you may have more knowledge, expertise in this field, but, you know, this is what we're going to talk about, this is how we're going to get it done. So just like finding your niches, being respectful of that niche with the other people and the groups that they're in, but just knowing that you guys all are supportive of one another.
Thank you, Marcus. Yeah. And then I'm coming back to that.
I realize if I'm just not aggressive here, I'm never going to get to say anything. All right. This is a good thing, by the way. All right. I'm just wondering how you're thinking about coalitions and how I might want to clarify my own language around this. I think you've just done a really good job of talking about how to run a meeting, all right, and run a group and exert leadership among people who've already joined something, okay? But mostly using the example of individuals. I tend to think of coalitions as something that happens among groups, right? Whether they're small groups or large groups, where you're actually, your own group has a history of having accomplished something. It's already an entity. So what's happening in the group might be a fledgling way of thinking about, you know, alliances and relationships. But the groups themselves have longevity. For example, if there's a student group here that goes, students come into the group, students leave the group, but the group itself does exist and continue on. And the nature of what kind of coalitional politics it's involved in with other groups. Thinking about the earlier question, this sort of people at your event and that kind of comment. So the whole notion of how groups can really influence one another, because their memberships are not pristine. You belong to more than one group, right? Politically. If you may be in the, I don't know, the choir, anybody ever sing? Right? And you might also be in some other group, you know. So we belong to multiple groups, and to think about, we're talking about groups that have historic legs in terms of systems of power in this country, racial groups, sexual groups, that kind of thing. But the whole notion of coalitions among groups, to shift the discussion to realize we're talking about groups, that's kind of what I have in mind, and that comes from my background in community politics, which is about that. But I just want to get a sense of your thoughts about that. Is this an individual issue, the way you conceptualize coalitions? Or do you think about it in terms of groups of people? Or it could be just a rhetorical question and we could leave it at that.
I think we need to, because it is, we have to wrap up. So I actually want to, does anybody in the outer circle just want to make, we actually won't respond to it. So make a comment or ask a question. Do you want to make a comment or ask a question?
All right, so I'm going to try to make this into a comment instead of a question. But this past semester, like one of my professors mentioned, like you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. and I often find myself in situations based on like the job that I have, where they expect me to speak for my entire generation, or they expect me to speak for every Black female in college ever. So it gets to the point when you don't want to argue with a wall, and there's no point in even having a logical discussion with someone who has already made their mind up and could care less about what you have to say. But then it also gets to the point where I know people who don't have the opportunity to be in the seat that I'm in or to answer the question that I'm being asked. So how do you, well, this is now a question, but how do you confront with whether or not I can remain silent? Because sometimes if someone's talking, they're talking to hear themselves talk. Or when do I defend or speak up for someone that's unable to speak up? I'm just trying to find a balance between that.
Thank you. So, yeah, I'm actually going to give
I'm just
you.
going to do, no, don't thank me.
I'm going to get the last. You're going to get the last.
I get the last word.
You're going to get the last word.
This is not the last
That's
word.
appropriate.
Okay, because I think this is really important.
Go for it.
I mean, this strategy of thinking you have to answer every question. Why do you have to answer every question? A really important skill is to change the terms of the discussion, which you can do even if you don't have power in a meeting. You can say things like, that's a really interesting question. I get asked that a lot. However, here's the real question, because you pre-thought your response to that. The real question may be blah, 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 and then you talk about what you want to talk about. So if you go in there prepared and you know the group that you're representing, you know what their issues are, and they can't come to the meeting, you don't cede your seat or sit there quietly. You look for opportunities to make your case, all right? And sometimes you can make your case in ways that they don't even see you coming, because no one assumes you're prepared in that way, right? I would also encourage you to have an arsenal of skills where you can change your persona at will. Sometimes you can be really nice. Oh, that's such a good question, but you know, I don't think we have time for that today. Maybe you and I can chat later on. However, you know, I just want to bring up something while I have the floor, and then you leave again. Or you don't want to be typecast as the angry Black woman, the sullen Black woman, the whatever Black woman it is, because that's how people who ask questions like that will view you. So I think the question of being much more sophisticated about this is something that comes with practice. Okay? So yeah, I know, yeah, I had to, because I spent a lot of time in that meeting, all right, with a lot of different people. Okay.
I mean, I really could listen to you, right? We could listen to Dr. Collins, just listening on. So, Dr. Collins, thank you